The mayor shook my hand. The local paper took my picture. They called me a hero, the loyal daughter who saved a town landmark. I stood there, smiling under the warm lights at the town hall, smelling the faint scent of floor polish and civic duty. But inside, I felt like a fraud, a thief, because I wasn't saving my father's legacy. I was serving a life sentence inside of it. And the applause felt like the sound of cell doors locking, one by one.
What happens when the dream you're living belongs to someone else? When love and duty become a beautiful, suffocating cage? I'm Susan Bentley, and this is Unbroken Women. Today we're hearing the powerful story of Jenna Alvarez from Asheville, North Carolina, a woman who had to learn that sometimes honoring the legacy means having the courage to write your own chapter. This is her story.
My world smelled of aging paper, ink, and the lukewarm coffee I'd forget on the checkout counter for hours. Alvarez Books wasn't just a store. It was a museum of my father's heart. After he passed, slipping into his role felt as natural as breathing. I knew the creak of the third floorboard from the back, the exact slant of afternoon light that would hit the poetry section, the way the old brass bell on the door would jingle a slightly off-key welcome. My days were a rhythm of routine. Unlock at 9, brew the coffee, dust the shelves, talk to the regulars who'd known me since I was a girl in pigtails, lock up at 6. It was peaceful, predictable. People would tell me how wonderful it was, what I was doing for my father's memory, and I believed them. I loved my dad. Preserving his world felt like the purest expression of that love. In the back of my closet, under a pile of old sweaters, my first real film camera gathered a fine layer of dust. I'd bought it with every dollar I'd saved in college. Sometimes late at night, I'd take it out, feel the cool, metallic weight of it in my hands. I'd imagine framing a shot, telling a story through a lens. But then the sun would come up, the bell on the door would need polishing, and the dream would get packed away again. It was a life of quiet service, and for a long time, I convinced myself that was the same thing as happiness. The weight wasn't something you could see. It was an atmospheric pressure. It was in the proud, sad way my mother looked at me. It was in the friendly pats on the back from customers who'd say, "Your father would be so proud." Every compliment felt like another brick in the wall being built around me. I was becoming a monument. Jenna Alvarez, the good daughter, the keeper of the flame. I wasn't a person with my own desires. I was a custodian. I'd catch my reflection in the dark glass of the shop window at night and see a stranger wearing my face. She looked tired, responsible, but the spark in her eyes, the one that used to flare up when she talked about film, was gone. It had been replaced by a quiet, dutiful haze. The weight was the silent, crushing expectation to be someone else's ending instead of my own beginning. The first whisper came on a rainy Tuesday. The store was empty, the only sound the gentle drumming of water against the big front window. I was shelving a new biography, the crisp spine cracking softly as I opened it. A young woman was on the cover, an explorer who had charted unknown territory. I traced her confident face with my finger, and then the thought, uninvited and unwelcome, slipped in. What territory will you ever explore? It was quiet, but it echoed in the silence of the shop. I looked around at the towering shelves, the familiar landscape of my life. For the first time, it didn't feel like a sanctuary. It felt like a border, a map that had been drawn for me with no blank spaces left to fill in myself. I quickly shook the feeling away, blaming it on the gloomy weather, and went back to shelving, the rhythmic thump of books a comforting distraction. But the whisper remained, a tiny crack in the foundation of my well-ordered life, a question mark hanging in the dusty air. The letter arrived in a stiff, cream-colored envelope that looked completely out of place amidst the usual stack of publisher catalogs and bills. Sterling Development Group. My hands felt cold as I opened it. They wanted the building. The whole historic block. They weren't just making an offer, they were offering a fortune. A number with so many zeros it looked like a typo. It was a vulgar, impossible sum. And my first immediate gut-level thought was not, how dare they? It was, this is it. This is the key. The money on that page wasn't just money. It was 4 years of film school. It was equipment. It was a life. My life. Of course I said no. I wrote a passionate op-ed in the local paper. I started a Save Main Street petition. The town rallied behind me, which led to the town hall meeting. I stood at a podium, my carefully written speech about community and history trembling in my hands. When I finished, the room erupted in a standing ovation. People were cheering for me. The mayor called me the conscience of Asheville. My mother was in the front row, weeping with pride. And as I stood there, bathed in the glow of their admiration, a wave of nausea so profound washed over me, I thought I was going to faint. They were celebrating my sacrifice, while all I could think about was the key I was leaving on the table, the life I was refusing to unlock. They saw a hero, I saw a coward, choosing a familiar, gilded cage over the terrifying possibility of flight.
I went home that night and shoved the developer's letter into the bottom of my sock drawer, as if burying it under wool could bury the feelings it stirred up. I tried to rationalize. It's blood money, I told myself. It's the price of my father's soul. I threw myself into the bookstore with a frantic energy, rearranging sections, planning events, trying to be the perfect daughter curator everyone believed me to be. But the denial was a thin blanket against a blizzard of fear. What was I so afraid of? Judgment, yes. My mother's heartbreak, the town's disappointment. But there was a deeper, more personal terror. What if I sold the store and I failed? What if I went to film school and discovered I had no talent, no vision, no voice? Then I wouldn't just be a failed filmmaker. I would be the girl who sold her father's legacy for nothing. I would have traded a certainty, even a suffocating one, for a void. The bookstore was a painful life, but it was a life. It had shape and meaning, even if that meaning belonged to someone else. The thought of stepping out from behind its sturdy brick walls into nothing was paralyzing. My heart would race every time I thought of it, a frantic bird beating against my ribs.
The breaking point came a week after the town hall meeting. It was almost midnight. I was alone in the store, doing inventory. The silence was absolute, thick with the ghosts of stories, my father's included. I walked through the towering aisles, running my hand along the spines of the books. These were my father's friends, his passion, his life, and I was their jailer. I saw my reflection in the dark storefront window, distorted and pale under the single desk lamp I'd left on. A woman in a cardigan, a pencil stuck in her messy bun, her face a mask of exhaustion. There was no joy in her eyes, no hope, just a profound, bone-deep weariness. And in that moment, the carefully constructed dam inside me just crumbled. It wasn't a loud, dramatic shatter. It was a silent, total collapse. I slid down the side of a bookshelf until I was sitting on the cold wooden floor. The tears came, hot and silent, a flood of everything I had been suppressing for years. The grief for my father, the resentment of my role, the shame of my secret desires, the terror of my own cowardice. I was suffocating under the weight of a million beautiful books. I was dying in here. And for the first time, I admitted it to myself. Something has to change. I cannot do this for another 30 years. I simply cannot. The sun rose, casting long, dusty beams of light across the bookstore floor. I hadn't moved. I felt hollowed out, empty, but also strangely calm. The storm had passed, leaving a quiet, steely resolve in its wake. This wasn't going to be a happy choice. It was going to be an earthquake. It would hurt people I loved. It would probably make me a pariah in the town that had just called me a hero. But the alternative, to stay here and let my own soul wither and die, was no longer an option. It was a matter of survival now. I pulled the developer's crumpled letter from my pocket. My hands were steady as I smoothed it out on the floor. I walked to the office, picked up the phone, and dialed the number. My voice, when I spoke, sounded like it belonged to someone else. Someone braver. "Hello?" I said. "My name is Jenna Alvarez. I'd like to discuss your offer." The developer's office was the polar opposite of my bookstore. It was all glass and steel and minimalist furniture. It smelled of expensive espresso and ambition. There were no dusty corners, no comforting clutter. I felt like I had stepped into a different dimension. The developer, a man named Mr. Hayes, wasn't a cartoon villain. He was calm, professional. He laid out blueprints and financial projections. He talked about revitalization, not destruction. As he spoke, I felt a strange and volatile cocktail of emotions. Terror, guilt, and a dizzying, unfamiliar surge of exhilaration. I was doing something for me. Something selfish and brave and utterly terrifying. I didn't sign anything that day. I just listened. But when I walked out of that high-rise building and back onto the familiar cobblestones of Main Street, the air tasted different, sharper. The world felt bigger than the four walls of my father's store. I had cracked the door open to a different life, and I knew, with a certainty that chilled and thrilled me, that I could never fully close it again. Telling my mother was the hardest thing I have ever done. I found her in the bookstore's back office sorting through old photographs of my dad for a memorial display. I chose my words carefully, trying to frame it as a new chapter, not an ending. She listened in silence, her hands frozen over a picture of my dad laughing behind the counter. When I finished, she didn't yell. Her voice was quiet, and that was so much worse. It was laced with a cold, brittle disappointment that shattered me. "Your father poured his soul into this place," she said, not looking at me. "Every floorboard, every dusty book, that was his heart. And you want to sell it for some hobby?" She finally looked up, and her eyes were filled with a pain that felt like an accusation. "It's like you want to erase him, bury him all over again." The words struck me like a physical blow. The news leaked out, as it always does in a small town. The friendly smiles on the street turned to frosty glares. The mayor, who had shaken my hand, now crossed the street to avoid me. I went from hero to villain overnight. The Save Main Street signs and shop windows felt like wanted posters with my face on them. I was the ungrateful daughter, the sellout. The isolation was immediate and absolute. I had never felt so utterly alone.
The bookstore became my enemy territory. Every time the bell jingled, my stomach clenched, expecting another glare, another whispered comment. My mother's words echoed in the silence between customers. "You want to erase him." Was she right? Was this a monstrous act of selfishness? Late at night, I'd lie awake, the developer's contract on my nightstand, my laptop open to a film school application page. I was caught between two worlds, belonging to neither. The guilt was a physical presence, a heavy blanket that made it hard to breathe. The temptation to call Mr. Hayes and tell him it was all a mistake, to crawl back into the familiar misery of my old life, was a constant, a siren song. At least in that life I was loved. At least in that life, I wasn't a monster.
The lowest point came while clearing out my dad's old desk. I found a box of photo albums I hadn't looked through in years. I sat on the floor, flipping through the stiff, plastic-covered pages, and there it was, a photo of me, maybe 5 years old, sitting on my father's lap in his big leather reading chair, right in the heart of the store. He's holding a book open, his finger pointing at a picture, and he's looking down at me with an expression of such pure, unconditional love that it took my breath away. In that moment, the weight of my perceived betrayal became unbearable. I wasn't just selling a building. I was selling this moment. I was selling that look in his eyes. The inner war was over. I had lost. I pulled out my phone, my fingers fumbling as I brought up Mr. Hayes' contact information. My thumb hovered over the call button. The tears streaming down my face blurred the screen. I was done fighting. I would call him. I would reject the offer. I would apologize to my mother. I would stay. I would accept my sentence. As I moved to stand up, my hand brushed against a stack of old leather-bound ledgers, sending them tumbling to the floor. Tucked inside one of them was a small, worn journal. It was my father's handwriting. I had never seen it before. My hands shook as I opened it to a random page. His familiar slanted script filled the paper. The entry was dated just after my college graduation. "I built this store from nothing," he wrote. "A place for stories. It's my whole world. But my greatest hope is that Jenna finds her own story to tell, not just the ones on my shelves. Her life should be her own masterpiece, not a postscript to mine." I read it once, then twice. It wasn't an accusation. It wasn't a burden. It was permission. It was a blessing. It was his love. Not as a cage, but as a key. The weight on my chest vanished. The tears stopped. My father didn't want me to be his monument. He wanted me to be my own story.
That journal entry didn't magically fix everything, but it changed the question. It was no longer about choosing between my dream and his legacy. It was about finding a way for them to coexist. I went back to Mr. Hayes with a counteroffer, a creative compromise. I sold the historic building, but I used a portion of the funds to lease a smaller, sunnier spot just off the main square. It wouldn't be the same institution, but it would be a continuation. I spent weeks carefully boxing up the core of my father's collection, each book a memory. I hired a young, passionate manager who saw books as a future, not just a past. And with the rest of the money, I enrolled in a documentary film program. The first tuition payment felt like the most defiant, hopeful act of my life. It was a slow, grueling process of reinvention, but for the first time, every step, every decision felt like it was truly mine.
Today, my life smells like new books and developing fluid. The new Alvarez Books is bright and alive. In a quiet corner, my father's old leather armchair sits next to a photo of him, a tribute, not a tomb. My mother even comes in for coffee sometimes. We're healing. And last week, I was standing on a mountain ridge at dawn, my camera on my shoulder, filming the sunrise for my first student documentary. I felt the cold morning air on my face, heard the whir of the camera, and I felt whole. I am a bookseller. I am a filmmaker. I am my father's daughter, and I am my own woman. I didn't destroy his legacy. I just opened it up and let the light in. I think about that woman, the one crying on the dusty floor of the bookstore, and my heart aches for her. I want to tell her that strength isn't about how much you can carry for others. It's about having the courage to finally put it down. You thought you were betraying him, but you were finally honoring his deepest wish for you. You didn't erase his story. You just finally gave yourself permission to start writing your own.
Thank you, Jenna, for sharing that incredible journey of redefining love, legacy, and self. What a testament to the power of finding your own voice. What legacy has shaped you? Share with us in the comments below. If Jenna's story moved you, please give this video a like and subscribe to Unbroken Women for more stories of courage and transformation. You won't want to miss what's next.